They say language is the mirror of a people's soul, that to speak a culture's tongue is to step into their minds, to share their myths, their fears, their dreams. But what if that mirror shattered before we ever glimpsed our reflection in it? What if the words of an entire civilization were lost? Not to time, not to fire, not even to conquest, but to silence. In the ruins of a forgotten palace on the island of Crete, under sun-bleached stones and the dust of 3,000 years, one of the greatest mysteries of archaeology was pulled from the earth. It wasn't gold. It wasn't a statue. It wasn't even beautiful in the way museums love to display. It was a disc, 6 inches wide, made of clay, and unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Inscribed into its surface, pressed, not carved, was a spiral of symbols. Strange, haunting, meticulous. 45 unique signs repeated over 200 times, coiling inward, like a secret trying to swallow itself. No scholar could read it. No civilization ever claimed it. No language on Earth matched its patterns. They called it the Phaistos disc. But what if that name, like everything else we've given it, is wrong? What if the disc isn't just a puzzle, but a funeral stone? The last words of a dead world. Or worse, a message never meant for us. I first saw it behind glass on a rainy afternoon in Heraklion. Tourists passed it by, their eyes caught by larger things, vases, jewelry mosaics of bulls and serpents. But the disc just sat there staring. There was something wrong about it. Not evil, just off. Like it didn't belong, not just to Crete, not to the Minoans, not even to our timeline. I stood there for 10 minutes, maybe more, and it didn't blink. That's the thing about mysteries, they don't solve themselves, but they don't go away either. They linger, they itch, and this one, it's been itching since 1908. That summer, an Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernier was digging through the ruins of the Palace of Phaistos, an ancient Minoan site, not far from the more famous Knossos. The Minoans, if you've heard of them at all, were Europe's first great civilization. Seafarers, architects, artists, lovers of bulls and labyrinths, and goddesses with serpents in their hands. Their language forgotten. Their script still largely undeciphered. Their legacy mostly drowned beneath ash myth and the Aegean Sea. But in July of that year, Pernier stumbled upon something different. Not statues or frescoes, not gold or weapons, but a disc buried in a basement room beneath layers of soot and rubble fragments of a time long since collapsed. When he cleaned it off, he saw the symbols. 2 spirals, one on each side, carefully arranged, as if meant to be followed like a story. But the story, whatever it was locked in a language that no living person could understand. Pernier must have known even then that he was holding something extraordinary. The disc wasn't scratched by hand. Each symbol had been pressed in with a tool like a stamp. That meant it was mass-produced, or at least meant to be copied. That meant it was printed. Think about that. The Phaistos disc might be the oldest example of printing in human history. Not Gutenberg, not China. Crete, 1700 years before Christ walked the earth. And yet, we don't know what it says. We don't know what it's for. We don't even know who made it. People have tried, of course. Linguists, archaeologists, cryptographers, even amateur sleuths and conspiracy theorists. Some say it's a prayer, others a hymn, a calendar, a game, a curse. But the truth is, no one knows. It's like the disc doesn't want to be understood. Or maybe we were never meant to understand it in the first place. You see, this isn't just about a disc. It's about everything we assume about history. That it moves forward, that it makes sense, that it builds toward us modern logical superior. But sometimes the past refuses to play along. Sometimes it stares back, with symbols that don't blink. So before we dive deeper, let me ask you this. What if the greatest message from the ancient world was one we were never meant to read? And if so, what does that say about us? Before we can begin to understand the disk, we have to understand the place where it was found. Phaistos. It's not a name you hear in history classes. Not like Athens or Babylon or even Knossos, its bigger, louder sibling to the north. But Phaistos was once a thriving city, perhaps even the beating heart of Minoan Crete. It stood proudly on a hill overlooking the Massara Plain, a stretch of fertile land that had been farmed for thousands of years. The perfect place to build a palace, the perfect place to build memory. The ruins we see today are just bones, dry, broken, scattered, but once they pulsed with life. Wide courtyards where dancers spun to the rhythm of drums, grand staircases where priests ascended to whisper with gods, walls painted with flowers, dolphins, and women in flowing skirts. These people had no fortresses, no weapons carved into their walls. What they left behind speaks of peace, of trade, of celebration. And then, silence. The Minoans disappeared, not in a day, not with a bang, but gradually, like a candle flickering in a room full of wind. Some say it was a volcano Thera, now called Santorini, whose eruption was so massive it shattered islands and summoned waves that tore through their harbors. Others point to invaders, Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland, who may have seen weakness in the ash and claimed the spoils for themselves. But at Phaistos, the truth is harder to pin down. The palace was destroyed not once, but twice, rebuilt after each collapse. The disk was found in a room of the second palace, buried beneath debris, dated to around 1700 BCE. That means it came from the era just before everything began to fall apart. A time when the Minoans still danced, still sailed, still wrote in scripts we barely comprehend. A time when their gods still answered. And yet whoever made the disk didn't use the language found on other Minoan tablets. Not Linear A, not Cretan hieroglyphs. The symbols on the disk are unique. A man's head with a mohawk-like plume, a fish, a shield, an archer, a flower, a helmet, a bird. Some of these images are familiar, but others, they don't appear anywhere else in Minoan art, or any other known writing system. It's as if the disk was carved from a dream, someone else's dream, which raises a disturbing possibility. Maybe the disk doesn't belong here at all. Maybe it was brought to Phaistos by someone else, a traveler, a merchant, a refugee. Or maybe it was buried there on purpose, hidden, sealed beneath ash and stone so no one would ever find it. And yet, we did. Why now? Why here? That's the problem with archaeology. Every answer opens another wound. Every layer you peel back only reveals another riddle. You can excavate 1,000 years of stone, but you'll never touch the thoughts of the man who held that disk. You'll never hear his voice, unless the disk is his voice. Unless what we're looking at isn't just a relic, but a recording, a memory pressed in clay, a message for the future, not to preserve what they were, but to warn us of what they became. Because here's something no one likes to talk about. After the second destruction of Phaistos, the palace was never rebuilt again. Not truly. The site faded, the power shifted, and eventually the Minoans themselves vanished from history. No great war, no final battle, just ruins and silence. Except for this disk, this single object that has no business surviving fire invasion or time itself. But it did, and it ended up here in our hands. What kind of message survives when everything else has turned to dust? What kind of voice endures? When the singers are gone, maybe we should stop asking what the disk means and start asking why it still exists. Because the disc doesn't need us to read it. It just needs us to listen. What makes a language real? Is it the sound? The grammar? The way it binds thought into shape, pain into poetry? Or is it something deeper, something sacred? Most of us never ask these questions because we live in a world soaked in words. Texts, signs, messages, commands. Language surrounds us, clings to us, defines us. But imagine this. Imagine holding in your hand a language that speaks, but no one can hear. That writes, but no one can read. That once sang through temples, markets, and mountain paths, and now drifts alone in the dark. That's what the Phaistos disc is. A phantom tongue, a message in a bottle tossed not across oceans, but across millennia. Stamped, not carved with symbols, no other culture has ever claimed. This wasn't a casual note. This was precision. Each glyph pressed carefully, deliberately, with a tool, a seal, or mold made for that exact sign. That means planning? That means purpose. And more chillingly, it means replication. This is not some lone scribe scrawling with a reed pen in the flickering firelight. This is a printing system. A system older than any other we've found. If true, that would make the Phaistos disc the first printed artifact in human history. Think about that. We praise Gutenberg for revolutionizing the world in the 15th century. We trace the spread of knowledge to ink and movable type. But here, in this clay spiral from Bronze Age, Crete lies a whisper of that same idea 2,000 years before Rome was even founded. It should have changed everything. And yet, no one talks about it. Why? Because we can't understand it. Because the moment we admit we don't understand it, we begin to question how much else we've missed. How many civilizations, how many languages, how many souls have slipped through the cracks of history? What if history isn't a timeline? What if it's a mosaic, fractured, rearranged, and full of missing tiles? The symbols on the disc don't resemble Linear A, the Minoan script we've yet to decode. They don't match Linear B used later by the Mycenaeans. They don't mirror Egyptian, Sumerian, Phoenician, or any other known system from the ancient world. Some signs appear to show weapons. Others depict animals, human figures, tools, abstract shapes. Are they phonetic sounds, pictographs, logograms? Are they meant to be read aloud or seen only by the divine? We have no Rosetta Stone, no parallel text, no bilingual inscription scratched in the margins. The disc is an island, a solitary voice severed from its speaker, adrift in time. And then there's the shape, the spiral. It begins on the edge and winds inward, like a snake coiling to strike, or a ritual pulling the reader toward a central truth. This isn't just formatting. This is intention. Was it a prayer spoken in a circle around a fire? A hymn chanted in processions, the speaker, walking clockwise through a temple's inner sanctum, or something darker? A spell, a curse, a sentence. Some scholars have suggested it could be a calendrical cycle, or a catalog of soldiers, or even a board game. But the truth is, every interpretation says more about us than it does about the disc. We project, we guess, we impose our categories on the unknown, but the symbols remain mute, and yet they feel alive. There's a strange familiarity to them, like glimpses from a dream you can't quite place, as if your mind recognizes something your history does not. That's the power of lost language. It haunts. It begs to be deciphered. It dares you to understand. But perhaps it was never meant to be cracked. Perhaps it was meant to be sealed. A language spoken only once by one people in one world. And now that world is gone, which leaves us with a terrifying thought. If language is the soul of a civilization, then whose soul lies coiled within this disc? And what did they die trying to say? History remembers what it wants to remember. The victors write the books. The survivors build the monuments. The dead, they whisper if they whisper at all. And the Minoans, their whispers have almost faded. We know they worshipped differently, that much is clear. No great temples like the Egyptians, no ziggurats like the Mesopotamians. Their sanctuaries were hidden, carved into caves, placed on mountaintops, built into the very bones of their palaces. We find strange figures in their art, bare-breasted priestesses holding snakes, men leaping over bulls, creatures with human limbs and animal masks. To them, the divine was not distant. The gods walked among them, lived in the land, breathed in the wind. They didn't build statues of Zeus or Poseidon. They danced. They poured wine into stone basins. They buried sacred objects in the earth and trusted the soil to remember. The Phaistos disc may have been one of those offerings, a ritual object, a hymn to a forgotten deity, a symbol of initiation, or perhaps a last plea pressed into clay before the world burned. If it is a prayer, then to whom was it addressed? The gods of the Minoans didn't survive. Their names were never recorded, their stories never written down. Not like the Olympians, not like the myths you grew up hearing, but pieces survived in strange places. The myth of the Minotaur half-man, half-bull, trapped in a labyrinth beneath a Cretan palace. That's not just a Greek story, that's a memory, a warped echo of something the Greeks encountered when they looked south and saw ruins and didn't understand. The labyrinth may have been real, an architectural marvel designed to confuse intruders, or perhaps to guide initiates through a spiritual journey. And the bull, the Minoans revered bulls. Their horns crowned palaces. Their images leapt across walls. Bulls were life-strength divinity. Sacrifice was not uncommon. And what of Ariadne, the woman who led Theseus through the maze with a thread? Was she a real priestess, a Minoan queen, later mythologized into legend? No one can say for certain. But if the Phaistos disc was part of that world, then it may be our only written testimony from a civilization that worshipped gods no one remembers. No texts, no scriptures, no commandments carved in stone. Just this disc, pressed, not spoken, coiled, not linear, silent. Perhaps it was never meant to be read by human eyes. Perhaps it was part of a sacred rite, read only by the initiated, the consecrated. Symbols not meant for outsiders, not even for the common folk of their own culture. Maybe that's why we can't break it, because it was never made for us. Some believe it was used in ritual processions. The spiral may have been walked, not read. The act of moving along its path might have held power, not the words, but the journey itself. Others think it was a funerary object, a list of the dead, a litany of names preserved in clay, buried in sacred ground to ensure safe passage to the afterlife, a kind of passport to eternity. But if that's true, then whose names are these, and what happened to their world? Because soon after this disc was buried, the palace of Phaistos collapsed for the final time. And the gods of Crete, whoever they were never heard from again. No records, no followers, no cults passed down in secrecy. Just myths, Greek myths, retellings by strangers. What if the disc is the only thing those gods left behind? One final message from a dying world to one that had not yet been born. A farewell, a warning, a prayer, or maybe a curse. We may never know, because the gods who died in silence don't answer questions. And the disc, it doesn't speak, it just stares, waiting. Every great mystery starts with a discovery, but every discovery, no matter how miraculous, is followed by doubt. The year was 1908. The The man was Luigi Pernier, an Italian archaeologist, digging through the ruins of ancient Phaistos. The summer sun beat down hard on Crete, and the stones of the palace lay in quiet ruin, the wind whispering over ash that hadn't been disturbed for 3,000 years. Then, beneath a layer of debris and soot in a basement room with no name, he found it. A disc. Clay. Unbroken. Covered in strange symbols arranged in a perfect spiral. He didn't know it yet, but he had just unearthed one of the most enigmatic objects in archaeological history. For years, the disc was kept in relative obscurity. Scholars examined it, measured it, photographed it. Some believed it was an example of Minoan script, though it looked nothing like the other Minoan texts. Others thought it might be an early calendar, or a legal document, or a song. Still others said be careful, because this disc was too perfect, too clean, too singular. Only one copy has ever been found. No duplicates, no fragments elsewhere, no other artifacts using the same writing, no transitional forms, nothing to show where it came from or what came after. Just this one complete object, like a voice echoing from a place that never existed. And so, the whispers began. Some said the disc was a forgery, that Pernier, desperate for recognition in a field dominated by British and German giants, created the disc himself. Crafted it from clay, stamped it with homemade seals, and buried it to be discovered. It wouldn't be the first time archaeology had been fooled by ambition. And yet there's no evidence, no confession, no tool marks inconsistent with ancient methods, no irregularities in the firing. Nothing about the disc suggests modern fabrication. Could Pernier have faked it? Possibly. But why only one? Why not a horde of similar objects to support the illusion? The theory lacks motive, and the longer the disc has survived, the more it resists those accusations. Still, the doubt lingers, because we want the disc to be either everything or nothing. Either a profound message from a lost civilization or a hoax, plain and simple. We don't like the in-between. We don't like ambiguity. But the past doesn't care what we like. The disc was dated by stratigraphy, the layer of Earth in which it was found. That puts it around 1700 BCE, give or take a century. No carbon dating was possible. The disc is fired clay, and there's no organic material to test. Its context, buried in the collapse of Phaistos' second palace, is the only real anchor we have. Some scholars believe it might not be Minoan at all, that it could have been brought from somewhere else, Anatolia, the Levant, even further east. If that's true, the disc may not be an artifact of Minoan language, but a relic from an entirely different people. A traveler, a merchant, a refugee carrying with them the last written remnant of a dying homeland. Or if you're willing to go further, a visitor from a place we've never discovered. Here's where the theories start to spiral, just like the disc itself. Was it an early experiment in movable type A, printing prototype lost to time? Was it a ritual object used by a priesthood whose language was kept secret? Or was it a fragment from a vanished continent, a culture lost in some catastrophic event that left no trace except this Atlantis, some say? Lemuria, civilizations erased not just from history, but from memory itself. Impossible, maybe. But then again, this is an artifact with no name, no lineage, no descendants. It is by all accounts alone. That's the part that haunts me. Most writing systems evolve. They leave behind scribbles, tablets, graffiti lists, the mess of daily life. But the Phaistos disc is too clean, too solitary, too intentional, as if whoever made it didn't expect it to be part of a collection, as if it was made for someone, somewhere, once, and then never again. So we're left with two possibilities. Either this disc is the tip of a lost iceberg, evidence of a forgotten civilization far more advanced than we ever imagined. Or it's the message in a bottle from a drowning culture thrown into the future in the desperate hope someone would read it. Either way, it landed here. And now we hold it. The question is, can we bear the weight of what it might mean? There's a moment when staring too long into the unknown that your mind begins to invent meanings, to draw threads where there are none. We want answers so badly, we start to see them everywhere. That's where the Phaistos disk lives now, not in history, but in hypothesis. Over the last century, dozens of theories have emerged, some grounded in scholarly rigor, others drifting on the tides of imagination. Some seek to decode, others to deconstruct, and a few to transcend altogether. Let's begin with what many would call the reasonable theory. Theory 1, a lost Minoan script. Some scholars believe the disk is an example of a lost Minoan writing system, perhaps a forerunner to the elusive Linear A. In this view, the disk is not alien, not anomalous, just another piece of the Minoan puzzle we haven't yet solved. It could be a hymn to a forgotten goddess, a dedication to a temple, a ritual chant meant to be read aloud in a spiral, like a spiritual incantation, calling forth protection or fertility or divine presence. This theory appeals because it fits. It connects the disk to the broader Minoan world, to their palaces, their art, their religion. But it also raises troubling questions. If it were part of a known script, where are the other examples? Where are the training tablets, the practice inscriptions, the translations? Nothing. Just this. Theory 2, foreign origins. Others suggest the disk is not Minoan at all, that it arrived in Crete by boat, carried by traders, emissaries or refugees from distant lands, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley. Each of these regions had writing systems that were complex, pictographic, and importantly also partially undeciphered. The disk may be an imported object, sacred or political, written in a language lost to its place of origin. In this theory, the Phaistos disk becomes a relic of cross-cultural exchange, a sign that ancient Crete was not isolated, but connected to a far wider world of trade and influence. It makes sense, to a point. But the symbols on the disk don't quite match anything we've seen. Not cuneiform, not hieroglyphics, not even Proto-Elamite or Hittite. They seem orphaned, as if they came from a culture that didn't survive long enough to leave behind more clues. Theory 3, a sacred cipher. Another idea more esoteric is that the disk is not a literal message at all, but a mystical one. A ritual object containing a sacred language meant only for the initiated. Some signs on the disk repeat in regular intervals. Some scholars argue it's a kind of poetic meter or chant rhythm. Others think it may encode numbers, not sounds perhaps related to astronomy, calendrical cycles, or ceremonial timing. If this were true, the disk would not be meant to be read in the conventional sense, but performed. A chant, a dance, a rite, a key to unlock a divine process long since forgotten. The mystery deepens. Theory 4, a hoax, a lie. There are a few even today who cling to the idea that the disk is a modern forgery. Too neat, too unique, too anomalous to be real. They say, why only one? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the right question is, how many have we missed? How many artifacts were broken, buried, or destroyed before anyone knew what they were? How many messages have we already crushed underfoot? Theory 5, the forbidden whisper. And then, there's the theory no academic journal wants to print. The idea that the disk is not from this earth, that its language isn't human, that its geometry, its encoding, its spiral arrangement represents a technology or intelligence beyond our own. Some compare it to crop circles, suggesting the spiral holds encrypted energy patterns. Others say the symbols resonate with mathematical harmonics, that the disk is a kind of artifact from another intelligence, left behind for us to find. It's easy to dismiss, but it's hard to ignore. Because at the heart of all this, beneath the layers of theory and reason and speculation, remains the raw, unbroken fact. We do not know what the disk says. Not with all our machines, not with all our scholars, not even with our imaginations. The symbols remain untouched. They are still waiting. So we keep guessing, keep writing books and giving lectures and drawing diagrams, but none of it changes the truth. The disk does not care what we think. It waits. And maybe, just maybe, that's the message. In the Heraclean Archaeological Museum on the island of Crete, the Phaistos disk sits in a glass case. It doesn't glow, it doesn't move, it doesn't pulse with hidden energy. But it does something far stranger. It refuses to speak. Thousands walk past it every year. Some barely glance at it, their eyes drawn instead to grander things, golden jewelry, frescoes of bull leapers, fragments of a world we think we understand. But the disk is still a question. And like all great questions it haunts. There are no new clues, no second disk, no buried library waiting to be uncovered with a matching script and a cipher key. The disk remains what it always was alone, an object out of time, a message in a language no one speaks, a symbol pressed into clay by hands that are now dust. And yet even in its silence, it speaks volumes. Look at its shape, a spiral, beginning at the edge, winding inward tighter, closer, until it disappears into a center that cannot be read. That's not just a design choice, it's a metaphor. The spiral is motion. The spiral is thought. The spiral is time itself looping, repeating, never quite returning to the same place. And if the disk is a spiral, then it's not a sentence. It's a journey. One you don't read. One you walk. Maybe the meaning isn't in the words. Maybe it never was. Maybe the meaning is in the act of searching. The disk has been called many things. A calendar, a hymn, a game, a riddle, a hoax, a relic of Atlantis, a printout from an alien mind. But what if it's none of those? What if it's a mirror? What we see in the disk tells us more about ourselves than about the people who made it, because every age wants the disk to say something different. In the 1900s, scholars thought it must be a lost Indo-European language proof of ancient migrations. In the 1960s, some said it was psychedelic poetry evidence of ritualized trances. In the 1980s, with the rise of computers, cryptographers believed it could be solved like a code. And today, we wonder if it holds knowledge we were never meant to unlock. But all of these are reflections, echoes of our own needs. Our need to understand, our fear of forgetting, our obsession with beginnings. And maybe that's why the disk has endured. Not because it tells us who the Minoans were, but because it reminds us how easily history disappears, how language crumbles, how gods die, how civilizations vanish not with a war or a bang, but with silence. One day perhaps someone will read the disk, a breakthrough, a discovery, a pattern we missed, or maybe not. Maybe the disk was never meant to be solved. Maybe it was made for someone who never came. And if so, then we are not the audience. We are the intruders, the latecomers, the ones who find a spiral and mistake it for a key. But there's something humbling in that, something beautiful, because even in its mystery, the disk has done what all great stories do. It has endured. It has traveled through fire and ruin, across empires and centuries to arrive here. In our world, in your ears, it has forced us to ask questions we had forgotten to ask. Who are we? What do we leave behind? What happens when no one remembers our words? We want so badly to believe that history is permanent, that our achievements will be preserved, that our stories will be told. But the Phaistos disc says otherwise. It says language can die. It says gods can vanish. It says meaning can be buried so deep it might never rise again. And still we look at it. Still we wonder. Still we reach across the silence hoping for an answer. That is what makes it eternal. Not because it is solved, but because it is not. So I leave you with this. What if the greatest messages from the past aren't the ones we understand, but the ones we can't? What if the Phaistos disc is not a key, not a puzzle, not even a warning, but a reminder that we too will one day be dust, that our words may one day be unreadable, and that mystery is not our enemy. It is our inheritance.